Hello, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are. Today, I'm interviewing, like a friend and someone that I've known for many years. Um, maybe since 2012 or 2013 or
Just
14.
about them.
Yeah, um, and we've worked together in sessions, but also I've socialized um, as well together. And I thought I would interview him a few years ago. Well, for many years, Nico has been an amazing um, journey, but a few years ago, there was like a big change that happened in his experience. And I thought it would be really interesting for people to hear. And I think that you'd really enjoy his story. He's got a very colorful story, especially his spiritual journey. And also I'm super interested as well. Like there's lots of things I do know about Nico's life, but I'm sure there's lots of things that I don't know that I've never asked in detail about. Yeah.
Well,
Um,
thank you for having me, Lisa. It's a
yeah.
pleasure.
Yeah. We tried to do it last year, and I mean, if I'm honest, there is a little bit of a feeling that I'm not the best interviewer because just of my personality and the way I am. But I've done a few more than now, and maybe I'm a little bit better now. So maybe I'll bring out some nice juicy stuff from you. Yeah. Yes, I thought that we could start about your story, especially your spiritual journey. I think you met your teacher, the main teacher, in when you were 19. I don't know what year that was, when you were 19 years
Yeah.
old. And it's like a very interesting story, like how you met him and then also having close proximity. And he was also very small. There weren't very many other students there as well. So you really got
hmm
hands-on experience.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can start by how I got to him.
Yeah.
Um, and it was basically through a massive crisis and uh, like synchronicity, just kind of the magic of synchronicity of this world where I ended up in a class kind of across town and then connecting with somebody in the class who there was a very big age difference, but we just really connected. And I started asking questions and asking questions. We went for coffee and I was just asking questions. And it was this kind of voraciousness of somebody had something that finally could answer questions I had. And at one point she basically said, like, I'm answering these questions, but it's actually I'm getting it all from this teacher. And
Yeah.
so actually what you're getting is from him. And, do you want to go meet him? And this was like after several weeks of just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And what was the crisis? Are you open to talk about that, or is that too personal?
No, I can talk about that. It was several years. My childhood was, it had this aspect of a lot of beauty and abundance and joy. And then there was very early on, there was this kind of creeping in of like a grayness or a darkness or something just kind of more difficult. Um, and it just started to get more and more like that from around when I was 5 or 6. And then by the time I was 15, things were very difficult. And the crisis actually started with I was a very voracious kind of studying all kinds of science, and I was very kind of a materialistic scientific mindset. And then I had this book from Richard Feynman that I read, and there was something in the book that I couldn't understand, and I thought I needed to understand that in order to be okay. Kind of my life was a bit of OCD-ish nature there. I needed to understand this aspect of kind of what I thought was me studying reality. I was very kind of passionate about truth, and I felt really that if I could understand this, then I could function and this life would be okay. I would be safe. So this kind of through that understanding of science. And in this book, there was a chapter about a particle, which I don't remember now anymore, but this particle that I couldn't understand. For me, there was no chance the particle existed. And I ended up, after many months through a summer where I was in a bit of despair. And this was, I was around 16. And then I ended up meeting a professor who had gone to do kind of nuclear physics. He was a researcher, has a PhD in nuclear physics. And so I came to ask him this question for him to explain it to me. And at first he thought I was joking, but because I was just wanting to ask him about these particles, and he didn't think I was serious. And then I presented kind of the problem, and he said, I'll just look into it and I'll explaining to you. Let's meet next week. And so I came to him a week later, and he asked me to show him the book, and he showed me the front of the book. He said, "This is printed in this date. This book is older than this. This theory was disproven. So this particle doesn't actually exist, and you were correct." And so that to me sent this kind of shockwave of despair, because the whole thing of kind of what I could find through science kind of got shattered. And you explained to me, so these are all just theories, and they're approximating what we understand of nature, but they're not reality. And that was just yeah.
And so you didn't have like a Christian or religious upbringing, so your mind had gone to more to science to try to find some form of meaning or order of safety.
Yeah, my mother tried to drag me to church many times. I would always kind of hide when it was Sunday morning. So it never worked. Since very young, I just had a very kind of scientific mind, probably through my father. Yeah. But I remember kids who would talk about kind of the stories of the Bible, and then I remember realizing very young that they thought they were real, and it surprised me that all along I thought these were stories, and suddenly I realized these kids thought these were true stories. And so it was this kind of that was the mindset that I had, and so that was shattered, and it was many years of going into just darkness, depression, despair. There was a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity, difficulty socializing. And I was starting to have experiences which, in hindsight, I could kind of see as openings, but I was very much unprepared, and also I had no reference to how to navigate that.
Yeah.
And so I went into periods where there was suicidal ideation. Things were really dark, and then there was this moment where I met this I did go into kind of the arts and into music and painting and photography and writing. I was writing voraciously and kind of moving away from science. I also got into Nietzsche, which was appropriately dark, but it was kind of that sense of looking for something in a different place. And so I started to look for it. I would always go to the library and grab a book. And so the books that started getting my attention were more related to kind of psychology or philosophy. And that's when I went to a class. This was about 3 years later. I was 19. I went to a class, and it was like a music harmony class or something. And there was this woman who was in her 30s, and she was a student of my teacher. Yeah. And so I started coming to her, like knocking on her door, and like it was just her husband, who is now a friend of mine, is like, "You need to do something with this kid. Like, you can't like be here all day."
And it's really sweet, because I think we're the same age roughly, and it's like, so when this was happening, it was kind of, the internet was maybe beginning, but there wasn't the spiritual search on the internet.
Yeah,
so
not at
it's
all.
not like these things were easy to find. I don't know what it was like in Argentina, but in England it was so hard to find these things, being curious teenager. So I can
I
imagine like
found,
you were like
yeah,
knock 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 every day.
yeah, and it wasn't, it didn't have a flavor that was very, I didn't see it as spirituality. I just saw it as common sense. It was just this kind of understanding of something which to me, I didn't understand it, but it just felt like this is finally somebody in this world I can talk to that understands kind of my world. And that is presenting to me something in a way that just makes sense. And I didn't find anything of spirituality in these bookstores or libraries. I maybe didn't think of looking there. Um, so yeah, and actually it was my teacher who told her, like, you just can't keep guiding him. You need to let him know that, I'm here if he wants to meet me. And so she presented that to me, and I was like, yeah, where is he? Where can I meet him? When is this? And so he was giving basically a weekly satsang in a house he would rent in Buenos Aires. And there was a group that still meets today, about 20 something people, plus minus, depending on the year. And this is 40 years, 35 years of this group meeting. And some people are more coming and going, but it's like a very core group that's just very stable.
30 years before you arrived.
No,
Okay.
since so
Since
so he his story is, I'll just give a little bit of his background. He was a businessman, very, very successful businessman, and kind of self-made, retired at in his 40s, and then he would tell us stories of just being miserable and trying to find, what to do. He did all of the psychology work he could. The therapist said, like, you're good, there's nothing more you can see through here. And there was a person who sent him, basically said, like, the only person that can help you is Bhagwan Rajneesh, whom you would know as
yeah,
Osho.
in comes our show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he's like, what is this? Who is this? Where can I meet him? Like a similar kind of thing that it was for me. He's like, okay, I have to fly to India. So he just first plane to India, got to the ashram.
Was
And
this
this
in the
was this was
70s
in
when
the
he was
80s.
so he was still there, Russia?
He was in this was I'm
Or
bad
was he
with
in
dates, but this was in the 80s. He was still there. And I think it was after Oregon.
oh, okay.
Um, I think he had gone back after Oregon, so I think that I might be wrong.
No, he did
Um,
for like 4 or
yeah,
5, maybe 6 years. Yeah.
yeah, okay. And so he had no idea who this person was, had never got into anything of spirituality or meditation or anything. And he was just so desperate. It was like, I'm going. And he, 2 3 days just doing all the meditations, doing everything that was to be done there. And on the third day, he had this huge awakening.
Wow.
And then there's like a lot of the details there that I could share, but there's limited time. But after that, he just came back to Argentina, and after a few years, he just rented a house. He was retired. He rented a house where it was just dedicated to meeting. And that's when, maybe 10 years later, I met him. Um, and so already there was a group there of about 25, 30 people, very dedicated to meeting with him. And that group, as I was saying, still meets today.
That's really
Um,
beautiful.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so he was like 30 years older than you or 40 years.
Yeah, he was 35, I would say. Yeah, 35 years older.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so sweet. Like it's sometimes, especially in non-duality, it's missed out the importance of community. Like it's so
Mm.
beautiful that you like still have that community that's still going for 30
It's
years.
so special. I mean, that was home for me,
Yeah. And that
basically.
and that really shows his wisdom, the ability for it not to implode or turn into like cultish behavior.
Hmm.
Like it really takes a lot of wisdom to work out all these personalities in order for it to
Yeah. Yeah.
exist and carry on. There's so many details to it. And you have like spiritual or groups which are breaking down ideas and looking at different ways of being and interacting. So
Yeah.
that's really beautiful. And I always get so excited when I hear Osho. I know he's like such a controversial,
Controversial.
yeah. And I understand that some people are really like damaged by some of the stuff that happens. But also there's so many people that it liberated and
Yeah. So
it's
much.
really penetrated into like mainstream media and
Mhm.
reached so many people. I mean, it was phenomenal what happened if you put aside the people that got hurt, which is inevitable when a massive community explodes like that. But,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
he's
Exactly.
still affecting, like, so he affected me. Like, I spent a lot of time at the ashram in Pune, and he's affected you through your teacher.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever went to the ashram.
I went. I went several times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's okay.
Or maybe two or three. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's so sweet that the community is still together and still.
Yeah. He passed away in 2018, and the community is still together working. There's a lot of friendship in that group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened to you when you met him? Like, was it instant?
So
Were you instantly attracted to him and the way he spoke, or were you quite shocked at?
it was energetic. So I got to this house, somebody at the door whom I just remember so vividly just welcomed me, and it was just this experience of entering home. It was just, and everybody that I was meeting there just felt just so much love. And then the satsang was, he didn't call it a satsang, it was a talk, but it didn't have that kind of language. But it was basically the format of giving there'll be a meditation and then a talk and then questions. And it was in a circle and everybody was sitting on the floor on pillows, including himself. And it was a big kind of like an empty living room with beautiful art. And he actually had like he was given from, after Osho died, he went to Pune and they gave him a marble from Osho's bedroom to take. And so that was
Oh,
there in
oh,
the room. It was beautiful.
wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I sat there, nervous, like so nervous. And it, just a sense of what am I getting into? But it just felt so right. At the same time, my mind is like, what the hell is this? What are you doing? Where are you? Um, and then he sat and we all sat around and I was sat uh, across from him, which was intentional by the person who welcomed me. He's like, oh, a new kid, let's put him like right in front of Roberto. Roberto was his name, Solari. Um, and then so he did something which he just gazed around the room. And so he was just gazing around the room. And the moment his gaze passed by me, I just felt this kind of fire erupt in my, this just energetic transmission that I had no idea. I had never heard of anything like that, but it was just this sense of just this eruption of warmth and joy. And I started kind of like laughing and giggling and kind of containing this joy. It was just so bubbly. It was this really palpable thing, which for me was, I never had felt anything like that in my life.
And
And so
would you now say that was like a kundalini awakening, or would you?
no, that came later, but it was basically that. It was just kind of the rising of that, but it was like a gentle rising. Um, and then then I just listened to him. He just made so much sense. I was just completely captivated, and I just wanted to be close to him. And I just did that as much as I could till he died, basically.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time with him. He was also a ridiculously funny person, and so he was a lot of fun as well. So yeah.
And he would do talks or every
So
week and
the
then do retreats and
Yeah, he did a retreat every year and he did talks every Thursday. And then once a month, the the one weekend would be kind of Saturday and Sunday all day in that house with him, and we would do all kinds of things from the Osho meditations, like a dynamic meditation, or and then a lot of just sharing, talking, and we would do self-inquiry, all kinds of practices that he adapted from all kinds of traditions. But it was basically a satsang every Thursday, which I tried to go to everyone, a full weekend, and then the retreat every year. Yeah.
And it really takes, maybe you have a different opinion on this, but to have a teacher, it really takes maturity, I think, from the way that the teacher interacts, but also from the student, to be able to see the humanness of the teacher and also to appreciate the wisdom. Because I'm sure that Ricardo, sorry, am I saying Roberto?
Roberto.
Sorry, Roberto.
Robert. Yeah.
Yeah, Roberto. I'm sure that he offended your ego many times, and you saw his humanness. So you saw that he wasn't a perfect God, and yet there was an ability to see beyond that to the communication of the wisdom and of the, the message and the positivity of it. You weren't just looking for positive all the time. You could see that, dynamics happen, dynamics in the group happen, and then there's still that commitment to continue. I don't know. And being 19 as well, that's a very vulnerable time.
Yeah, there was a lot around that, and he very intentionally showed the human aspect. He spoke about what you're saying very explicitly. So he said, he's a human being, and he would recite his kind of document ID number just to kind of give all of these, like, I am like a human being, right? And so you would make a point, sometimes very hilariously, like just reciting his ID number. But then the part of offending my ego, strangely with him, I never felt he said the most outrageous things to me, but I never felt hurt. So not in that way where you would with a person, especially when there was once I was on a Zoom call with him, and I was just like blah blah blah, my drama, blah blah blah. And at one point just gets close to the camera, looks at me, and he's like, because I was in Canada then, he's like, Nico, if I knew what part of your idiotic brain produced that thought, I will give you a lobotomy. So, but with this like real expression of anger, and I would just crack up, and he was just hilarious. But it was his way of saying, like, don't believe that thought,
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And I remember
he
another
was also calling
story.
me an idiot at the same time, like.
Yeah. I remember another story as well that you said you were 19. I can't remember what it was, but it was like you said something about, or when you were very young. Yeah, it was something about like in order to become a man, you couldn't do it or something. There was that I remember you telling me in the past, and it shocked me, but in a really beautiful, positive way. I was like, it was really profound what he said to you. And I think if I could remember what it was, you'd agree, like, and you'd remember it, but I've kind of forgotten. But I
Yeah.
remember hearing that story and thinking, oh, you're so lucky to come across that. Because I don't
Yes.
mean to like and it's not just luck actually, because it's also your karma, because a lot of people might have run away from that. It's like your habits and your
Exactly.
traditions.
Yeah.
But it's
So
also,
many.
yeah, it's also like knowing your story. It's when you hear your story, like it's really phenomenal, the transformation. Like we're not, like in the sense of like that, from what happened, it could have ended up a difficult life,
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure if I hadn't met him, I probably wouldn't be alive. I mean,
yeah,
I probably wouldn't have made it past my early 20s,
yeah.
honestly. Yeah.
And I
Like
can,
really,
yeah, I can really relate to that in the sense that I feel like if I hadn't got into this subject and met my teachers, I'd have most probably ended up heavily on drugs.
mm,
Like, if not, like I just wouldn't have been able to cope. There was too much suffering, like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and
the same for me.
and so there's just such like appreciation when I meet people and hear, you know, the transformation that happens in, yeah, it's really phenomenal. I wish it was studied. I wish, that these things were more like studied and known about in society, because a lot of the time in therapy, people can change, but it's not as phenomenally as they do when they do therapies and non-duality and spirituality. It's,
Hmm.
yeah, really,
Yeah, and this group that was and is around him, it all feel the same way. It's just so much gratitude and yeah, it's just so much love. So beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah.
And because he also made a lot of money beforehand, it also meant that he was free and available.
Yeah.
Like, so there's, yeah, that's really
Yeah,
beautiful.
he said that at times he felt like that was given to him so that he could
Yeah,
teach and have that time, kind
yeah,
of like the synchronicity of life.
yeah,
Mm.
really beautiful. And then, so you met him, and then at some point you moved to Canada from, yeah,
Yeah, about like 5, 6 years after that, um, I moved to Canada. This was partly the kind of the journey of professionally what to do, and I was very lost at that time when I met him, and so I started to kind of get organized, just working with him to get organized and what to do. And I had this kind of passion for things that were most scientific, and but I wanted them to be practical and not like theoretical physics, which is what I wanted to study when I was younger. And so I got into computer science, but with the approach of creativity. And so, because I'm also a musician, and I wanted to kind of do the creative side of artificial intelligence, which now is a big deal, but back then was kind of just like a dream or a vision that I had. And I pursued that, but I needed to go to Canada to study that and to kind of get more fully into the research of AI and creativity and music. So that's what took me to Canada, and he was very helpful in kind of just getting my life organized and kind of going after what I wanted.
yeah,
And then I would go back. I would Zoom with him from there, and I would go back to visit and do the retreat and just
yeah.
visit. Yeah.
And so, what was your like? So you, I remember it was something like this that he said to you that I remember. It's like he was telling you, you have to get your life in order. You have to, like, there was something like this. But
Yeah, I don't remember, but yeah, for sure.
so what was the next thing that happened? Like the next shift that you would say that happened when being with him? I mean, I'm sure there were so many.
There was so many experiences and shifts and energetic openings and all kinds of things that I couldn't make any sense of. And he was very deliberately not making sense of any of it. And um, kind of I felt I was trained to not try to interpret it or understand any of it and just keep kind of moving, or keep exploring and keep looking. But there were, in hindsight, I could see there was one really big opening. There were a few, but anyways, right on the early on side, it was doing I was doing a dynamic meditation, and this huge energy just came up, and it was kind of a mix of the most unbearable thing. I thought I was going to die, and at the same time the most painful thing and the most beautiful loving thing. um, but as it was going up, it was just terror and pain. And as soon as I managed to kind of stop it, because all I was trying to do was stop it, um, as soon as I managed to stop it and it started kind of slowing down and kind of receding, because it felt like this current that was coming up, as soon as it started receding, I realized that the pain aspect of it was just the interpretation from fear. As soon as the fear went away, it was no longer pain. It was just this like blissful, loving, just mysterious sensation or energy. Um, but it was so powerful. It was this sense of, this is gonna kill me. I can't be with that at the same. I can't be with this as it's coming up. And I shared that with him, and as always, he got very interested, which was kind of unusual. I would share experiences, and he would just kind of go like, "Oh, okay, let it pass," and that's what happened. And you know, not much interpretation. And here he got very excited and started asking me a lot of questions, which to me made no sense, and I don't remember them now. But he was kind of like diagnosing, and he wanted to kind of check what I was sharing, and then he said the wildest thing. He's like, "Well, go there as much as you can, make it your friend, and in about 20 years, that's either going to kill you, so you're going to go crazy." Oh, he said, first he said, at one point you won't be able to stop it. If you're lucky, you won't be able to stop it. And at that point, you'll either die, go crazy, or have an enlightenment, he called, I wake up. And I was like, okay. To me, all that kind of thing was like, what are you talking about? 20 years, like. But I was like, okay, I'm following the guidebook, he's telling me to go close to that and whatever. And so I knew, because of that dynamic meditation, I knew kind of how to access that, or how to kind of ignite that. And so I started kind of practices of exploring that. And whenever I tasted, imagine like at that moment I had tasted, what by then was like the max I had tasted, it was like 100%. If I tasted 1% of that, I would just run. It was just so unbearable.
Yeah.
And so I literally did spend 20 years kind of running from that.
Yeah.
And
I think I kind of met you in the middle of it, because I mean, I have
yeah,
a terrible memory, but if I push and squeeze, I kind of remember in the beginning when we first started speaking, you'd had a big opening again or something of it, or it had opened
yeah,
again, and
yeah.
we talked about it, and like managing it, or not managing it, but just like physical pain that came off from it.
Yeah, so there was a big, so about 10 years later, a bit less actually, it was like 8 years later. This is 2009, I think. I was in some really big kind of crisis again. And I went, but I had kind of tools to manage, right? I also had tools to avoid, like certain meditations. But anyways, I I went for a very intense run in the middle of the night in Vancouver, rainy winter evening, and like I was just like desperation. I need to kind of run, and I just ran out the house, and I ran like 10 blocks till kind of my legs just gave out, and I just stood in the rain, and then suddenly that came up, but it went straight through me, and I just saw, I could see this like blue, like lightning, sparkly light going through me and my arms and my head. It was just kind of, which in hindsight, after what happened and what happened after that, I recognized as a kundalini, kind of more full-blown kundalini opening. And that was really a rough ride. There was these moments of like just complete incredible bliss, a lot of mystical openings and bliss, and there's so many experiences I can't narrate. The experience of like having beings come and feel them and touch them, being touched, and just this really wild kind of range of experiences. I learned what prostration really is from. It's like you don't prostrate intentionally, you are prostrated. I was cooking pasta, and I looked at a like ravioli on the fork, and I just suddenly saw it was the most beautiful thing I had seen. And in that beauty of the ravioli, I just felt this current, just like a waterfall, come right through me, and I ended up on the floor with my head on the floor.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, it was so dense, I couldn't lift my head.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's interesting that the waterfall came up like at a different time, because sometimes with the Kundalini awakenings, it's so different for everyone. But sometimes you have the strong going up, and then you have like this feeling of something coming down, like water or egg yolk or energy
yeah,
coming down.
I've had all kinds of
Kinds of,
ups and downs, and like the what you're calling the yolk, like the substance coming like right out of my chest, like pushing through my, and I felt as it was like breaking my rib cage. And I was having a lot of this kind of movement in all directions. I spent like a week sleeping like an hour or two a night. I was having kind of rises of energy and blissful moments. But that waterfall was just absolute bliss as well. It wasn't, and it was like I was gone, and then I would come back, and I was gone, and I would come back. And there was also a lot of physical pain that started coming, and I ended up going to the hospital multiple times till the hospital basically had done all the studies possible, and they thought I was this somebody told me later, I think it was Catherine who told me later, no, they thought you were asking for morphine, because I was like on the bed in the hospital screaming at the doctors to do something because I was in so much pain, and they're like, you're fine, like we've done all the time.
they're like, oh, he's a drug addict.
Yeah,
We're
they
not
kicked me
giving you
out. They're
more
like,
than.
yeah. They basically said if you don't, we can call you a cab, but if you don't leave, we're gonna call the police.
No.
And I was like, how could you do this? Like, I didn't understand then when I was kind of explained that it was, they understood I was asking for morphine as an addict.
Yeah.
Then it made sense. But yeah, I was just desperate. I left the hospital and I said, okay, no, nobody can help me with this pain. Um, and so
And was this
that kind
the,
of,
was this, when was this? Had I met you by then? I do remember you talking about
I
a lot
met
of
you
this pain.
not long after, like 2 years after that. And so there was like a year where I just stopped meditating. Like for a year, I didn't meditate. It was just too much, and I was too afraid of like any kind of movement. It was just a lot of physical pain. I felt like I was being physically tortured at times. Honestly, it was so intense.
And what was
Um,
Roberto's take on it?
his take was he had a phrase which is "aguante o reviente," which means, well, you either make it or you blow up like a frog. He was like, he said, like, well, this is a very authentic, energetic awakening. Now, like, see if you can bear through it, and if you blow up like a frog, then that's what happens.
You blow up like a frog.
Yeah. So that was
This
his.
is quite a good image because I don't know much about frogs, but you get some frogs that totally their heads, they go and their head totally goes into like just the skin in the air. I don't know what type of frog that is, but
Yeah, I don't know, but it was brutal. Um, but then what I could see then, and more in hindsight, everything looks more clear. Kind of the process. It's like the after that, the shadow just opened up.
right.
I was just going into trauma and so much pain, emotional pain, but images of like being a baby and all of the pains from there. And then there was a point I started to hit a wall, and like something was coming up that I felt very powerful energetically, and I couldn't be with it. Um, and it was basically a moment where it was so intense, and I was like on a third floor in an apartment, and it was so hard to be with that. I had this impulse of running straight out the window,
Mm.
and it was like the way to kind of, I couldn't face it, so that's the way out. And I remember just before getting to the window, there was a wooden beam, and I started punching the beam. I broke like 5 bones in my hand, but
Yeah.
that was the way I managed to stay.
Yeah.
Um, and then what came up was what could conventionally be described, which is still for me it's unexplainable, but under the past life memories and
Yeah.
traumas from past life,
Yeah. And this
and
is
really brutal things, like really painful.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing that, because this is something that doesn't, people getting into this subject and non-duality, they kind of have the impression that at just some point they're just going to move back to awareness, or there's going to be a gentle movement to awareness, or maybe they'll have a bit of like the dead feeling like they're going to die, and then that will be it
It
done.
might, yeah,
It's like they've been
it
doing
might
it for
be, yeah, it might be for some people if you're very lucky and you have really good karma. I don't know.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
me, it definitely was not the way.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
for me either. And for me too, the pain got so bad with I didn't know the language of kundalini back then, like you as well. And Roger wouldn't talk about it. You know, he wouldn't really talk about that, but he would encourage me to do the energetic stuff. It got so bad for me. I mean, I don't think, admitted this online because of my family, and like, yeah, it's hard for them to hear or see these types of things. But it got so bad, I also would hit things to try and take away the pain of it, the physical and emotional pain, like, you know, shaking and pain for days. It's like there's a certain amount, like, and it really does, like, absolute force surrender, because it's so unbearable to feel. It sounds easy in a story, but when you're actually doing it, it's not.
Yeah, it's so brutal.
No, it's really brutal. So yeah, it's really something, your story. And I think, um, yeah, when I met you, I didn't really have still the language of Kundalini, even though I'd experienced that. It's only in retrospect now that I understand it better, that I can put it into
Yeah, I
context.
also say in hindsight, it's a lot more clear. But back
Yeah,
then, I had this framework of like, don't try to understand any of this.
yeah,
And so I was just like going just deeper or as deep as I could. And yeah, and I met you right after. You showed up online, and I just immediately recognized you. It's like, this is the same energy as my teacher. And so I started joining your calls, and then I started doing the one-on-ones, and it was just so nice to talk to you, by the
yeah.
way. Yeah.
And so opposite, I think, maybe in personality to Roberto. Like,
Oh yeah.
maybe he was a bit with the sense of humor, but like, we
Yeah.
both appreciate sense of humor, but a lot more maybe softer. Yeah. And so then 10 years, another 10 years or 8 years passed, and we kind of
Yeah,
would
and
see
then
each other on and off, like, from my memory, more on the last like 4 years or something. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I really at one point just started to book you as much as I could. And I was working with my teacher and talking to him about everything I was going. I was talking to him about what I talked to you. And so it was just this like, I was like full on. And but at one point, what started to happen is, well, I met Catherine, and that was this kind of really profound love, really profound kind of recognition and with another being, and just immediately it just had a life of its own. It's like we were both like, oh shit, like this is a big deal. And so that became my life very, very quickly. Um, and then the work, so I introduced him to my teacher. So I introduced her to him, I introduced Catherine to Roberto, and we started, doing this work together. And there's also, I want to mention, uh, Roberto had, after his awakening, had another teacher who helped him kind of integrate all that, and his name is Richard Moss.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and I've mentioned him to you, and I really wanted to mention him because he's been really central in my life as well. And so from when I was very young as well, because he would travel to Argentina twice a year. So I would do a lot of all of his workshops and all of the work with him, and I still talk to him.
yeah. You showed videos to me of him, so he's a really beautiful
Yeah,
person, really
he's
beautiful.
he's amazing as well. And so yeah, what happened is, if I try to narrow down kind of the process after that, it had a lot to do with um, kind of the intimacy of relationship and being very vulnerable and authentic and going through the challenges of relationship. And That was kind of, for me, it felt like just really setting this ground for something. It was a different kind of mirroring happening, a different kind of mirroring of what's happening here, what's my mind doing, what am I doing. And then there was a period where I just felt there was not much more I could do. And I was doing, the meditations and going to the retreats, and but I didn't feel much more energy to kind of look much harder or push much harder. Or I was just managing what was happening. And Catherine would ask me, I think for a long time, she would ask me, how's it going? How are you feeling? And I always had kind of, for many years, the same answer was just sadness, like loss. And the sense was like every day I just felt this sense of loss. And it took me kind of a time to put words to it. And it was just this sense of loss. I'm just losing something. Something's being lost every day. And again, in hindsight, I think it had to do, back then I was just, the sense is like life sucks in this way, right? There's this sense of loss, and nothing's changing, and this could be forever, till So that was the mindset or the perspective. But in hindsight, it had to do with like all of the personal dreams and the fantasy of life, and this kind of the narrative of in time of the future and what I was going to get and where we were going, and all this kind of thing just started to kind of dissolve in a sense. And then kind of skipping a little bit, Roberto passed away, and that was just devastating. I was completely heartbroken, and
It was a sudden passing, wasn't it? It wasn't.
It was a sudden passing, so no, it was unexpected for all of us. And so there was a lot of grief in the community. There was a lot of despair in the community. And for me, there was a sense of, I didn't feel I felt the loss of him, but because I had been very open with other teachers, I felt at that level there was something that wasn't, I still felt the grief of losing him, and I was in despair for a while, but I felt I could still, it's kind of hard to describe. And it kind of reminds me of my experience going to Osho, the ashram. The first time I went there, I remember doing kind of the meditation in the pyramid, which was a little bit empty that time. It was probably like a low season. And after that meditation, I felt this sense of Roberto was still alive. And I felt all these people here are here for somebody who's gone. So I understand there's the energy and the teaching and the presence, but a lot of it felt like they're here for somebody who's gone. And I felt as if Osho was on the other side of a veil. And I knew Roberto was on the other side of that veil, but he was here. I felt that. And then I felt, oh, Roberto's going to be on the other side of life. He's going to be with Osho. He's not going to be here. And that to me was this kind of sense of like, I'm not staying on this side. That was the kind of how I experienced it. Was this kind of trippy, there was this veil, and I'm not going to stay on this side. I don't want to stay here. And it makes me a little emotional to remember that. It was just this sense of, I understand now the veil was my own mind. But just the darkness that was there, yeah, and so that's reminding me when Roberto passed, it was like, okay, it's happened. There was this sense of just something happened there. And then we came right away. I think we came to India to spend a week with you in a retreat. Um, and then we went to see Francis Lucille, and with whom I knew his teaching for many years, listened to a lot. I had joined some of the online things, but I never had gone in person. And Catherine had gone to see him in person, and then we went together again. And I was there in literally in like 2 days, which his retreats are very different to, you know, the retreats I was used to doing with Roberto were very intense, like very much like you go to Pune and there's like activities and meditations and a lot of, you know, energetic things happening. Whereas with Francis, it's just like there's a satsang and then you do whatever you want. You could go to town and drink a bottle of wine if you want. You know, just very, very chill. But I remember feeling this is very powerful energetically. And in the meditation, at one point, just out of nowhere, just everything just disappeared. And there was a big shift that happened there that it took me about 4 years to even kind of make sense of, and I haven't made sense of it either, but to even kind of recognize that that was something, and everything just disappeared, and at the same time there was a knowing of everything disappearing, or there being nothing, which is really hard to put words to. And then I started to see kind of the universe being created, and there was this sense of it's being created. This is the part in words which is really strange to say, but it's like I was creating it. It literally felt as if I was creating this universe, and all of it, planets and all of it, and it just started to feel like this timeline of everything being created progressively, and then humanity and all, just this kind of slow creation at the same time fast, and then the creation of Nicholas, and then I opened my eyes. But it was this absolute knowing that I'm not that now, like the knowing that I'm not that, and I never was, but what I am is like, yeah, hard to put words and not feel like they're the wrong words. But this also reminds me, many years ago I had a moment when that kundalini thing happened. I was in the office, and one of the many things that had happened, there was one that was very, very specific, where I had this moment of a lot of fear, and then I saw kind of my mind, and I saw what my mind was doing and what I was doing with thought, and then suddenly it's as if I could see the person, kind of the character, that Nicholas was pure thought. And then I saw how I was doing this all my life since I was a child, kind of. And then it was as if, you know, they say in the movies that the moment of death and your life goes like your whole life goes by like that, like a timeline. It was literally that. I just saw my whole life, and it was just this mind Nicholas thing, and then it went like, phew, and all of like the office. It was as if what I was just completely went into everything. Um,
Yeah.
And then there was just, I'm in this office, I was like on the computer doing work, and this happened. Super weird. And then something came back, you know, but there was a fear that triggered a coming back of something, and I started to recognize like an attachment. There was a fear and an attachment. And so, but after what happened at Francis, I have a sense that that kind of obliterated that fear.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal, that kind of experience, and it's different for everyone, like the way it appears. Those um, those types of, I mean, even calling it experience isn't maybe correct
Yeah.
terminology, but the disappearing and then this coming back, like because you as that pure being is the creator of everything. So it's like it's coming back through that sense of I am. You know, it's like this energy of
Hmm.
like coming back and creating everything, and that you wasn't the beginning. The you character wasn't the beginning. The you character was
Hmm.
in it. Like
Exactly. Yeah.
it's yeah, and these things have such a profound impact that you can't really discern. You
Yeah.
can't like it does something. It really changes things. You can't necessarily discern in the moment what it's doing.
And I think only in hindsight could I tell which ones were more significant in that. At the moment, this one, for example, I completely, the one from at Francis, I completely overlooked it. I was like, here's another experience of the many kind of
Yeah,
shifts and openings. And
yeah,
but then over time, it's like, no, that one was different.
yeah,
Um, and and that's where I see a couple of years, maybe no, I think it was just 1 year after, something happened there where I started to notice situations that would really trigger me weren't triggering me. um, and but there was still, in my experience, it was still this like an unhappiness and a darkness and a distress, and I was complaining about everything all the time, but I was complaining less. I was, that was, how I was. If when I was 20, it's like 100% of mad crazy suffering, miserable. you know After what happened at Francis, I was at 5-10%.
mm,
But it was still this like constant distress.
yeah,
um and then there was kind of two more big things that happened. One was a big thing and the other one was like a, a big small thing. um the next big thing was, um I'll try to tell this one somewhat briefly because it was like a many hours process, but I started to feel that which I had met before I met Roberto. Remember, I told you I was having these openings. I was having this taste of that energy or substance or something that was what then Roberto said, like, get close to it, and it was unbearable. But when that was happening before I met him, I also went to the doctor. A doctor didn't find anything, and I started passing out. So I would be playing the piano, and then that would start to come up, and I literally would close my eyes, and then I would kind of wake up. I had kind of fallen asleep. I had had a dream or a vision, but it was kind of taking me out. Um, then many years later, this is kind of 2020. It started coming up. It started coming up, and it hadn't come up like that in many years. I had kind of forgotten, and there was this sense of like, I can't stop this. I really can't stop this. And I started begging Catherine for help, and she was like, what am I helping you with? What can I do? And like, I was just in despair. And so she was just with me. And I was on the floor, I was crying, I was speaking kind of mumbo jumbo. I was just completely desperate. And this was just coming up, coming up, coming up, coming up. And there was this sense of I'm not able to have any kind of push against this. Um, and then I started to see, it was as if it was the experientially, the perception was as if there was this presence or this seeing, this something that was kind of a consciousness that was seeing me. And it felt, if I would call it something, I would call it God. But the experience, it's not like I was in that moment, but that's like the dimension of what it felt like. It was being seen by God. um but experientially, I wasn't thinking I was seeing God. It was just this seeing that was of this absolute total magnitude. And being seen, I just started to feel so much shame. And the shame was that pain that I was feeling was shame. And I was like, oh, this, I'm so, and it wasn't like, oh, this is shame. I was like, I was just started verbalizing the pain and the shame. I was like, I'm so ashamed. I'm so ashamed. And Catherine, I don't remember what, but I think she was asking me what. And I started to see, it's like, I'm so ashamed. And the shame was the arrogance that I've had all my life to believe that I was something out of my own volition,
Yeah.
as if my will was my own, and what I've and anything has been created that I have created came from me. This kind of thing. You obviously know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. But it was this really profound sense of shame and of the arrogance of having believed that there was something here that had anything to do in creating anything of whatever. There's just, and it was so intense, and it felt like dying. It felt like I was dying. And then I started to see that which was seeing me, and I was seeing that which was seeing me. I started to feel like that can see all of this shame, can see all of this, because my sense was like, all I've been doing is trying to hide this fact that I have believed arrogantly that I am the creator of anything. That my will has anything that's independent or has its own agency. It's hard to word, but and then that seeing, I started to see I cannot hide this from that. And then in the moment I started to see that the seeing and what me seeing that seeing was the same seeing. And so that's why I couldn't hide it, because anything I see is being seen by that, and that can see anything I see. And in that moment, it was as if like the seeing and the seeing just touched, and there was no longer seeing and seen, and it was just this like fountain, but like an up fountain of bliss. And then that's where all of the sense of like dimension and space and myself and all of that just completely gone. At that in that precise moment, Catherine had gone to the washroom, and I had gone to grab I had a photograph of Roberto, and I was just on the floor, lying down, staring at the photo of Roberto. And it was like anchoring myself. That was kind of how I was kind of staying with that. And then that happened, and I put the photo down, and I was just in this torrent of bliss. And Catherine came out and sat next to me, and I'll describe what she described. She'll probably describe it differently and correct me, but what I remember her describing is as if she walked into kind of a fountain, and that went through her, and she ended up on the floor next to me in bliss. Yeah. And so we were kind of both just blissed out. And then
that's really
that
beautiful.
Passed, yeah.
Really beautiful. Yeah, your description of it as well is, yeah, just really lovely, like the seeing and the seen meeting. Really beautiful.
Yeah, and the seeing that there was some form of illusion that they were too, but yeah. And then I remember the day after, I just felt like completely exhausted, but there was a sense of like, oh, that happened, the thing Roberto had said 20 years ago. And it was like 21 years. It was like, motherfucker.
And you weren't dead, or you didn't explode like a frog.
Yeah, I might be crazy, I can't say, but I'm definitely not dead. So, and that was a massive thing. And then things were different from then on, but there was still this sense of like something, just this like some like underlying subtle distress, or like it's like a kind of anxiety or a restlessness or something, just distress about stuff. And I was still getting triggered here and there, and I wasn't trying to not get triggered. It's just like when you get triggered, you try to be present, you feel what you're feeling. I was just going through the motions of kind of the practices. And then maybe 1 or 2 years later, I was actually at a retreat with Francis, and I was trying to talk to him about this sense of a silence that I was experiencing, and I was completely confused. And I think he knew what I was talking about, but just a few weeks after that, I started to feel, I could describe it like today as emptiness, but it was, at first I was calling it silence, but it was like where I was, what I was just silence. And it was really strange. It was just this, I think because that last part was so gradual, I was just like, what is this? And I was spending like, I would wake up in the morning and I would sit for like 3 hours and, just trying to find this thing that I was experiencing. And then it took me time to realize it's something that's not here.
Yeah.
That's what is different.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. It's really like important point because in the end, like I mean, you had so many big experiences, and in the end, it was gradual. It's it's like when you have a big bang experience, you've got a comparison to a before and after. It's more
Yeah.
in a more dynamic and dramatic way. Whereas when it's gradual, and I've heard this from people before, then it's not like you suddenly realize something or you suddenly get something. It's this. It's like something is missing, like not missing in a negative way, but something is
Yeah.
absent.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really beautiful to hear. And from my side, like like I don't know if it was you or Catherine that told me first, but she just like I just remember Catherine being like Nico's different. Like it's just different now. And it was and then I can't remember how I or what conversation took place, but I just that sticks in my mind, her just saying that he's different. Like it's very easy now with him, like in the sense like it's very easy, the interactions, and yeah, he's just different.
Yeah, it was very different. And when things really kind of became clear, there was just a sense of like, oh, I never really suffered.
Yeah.
This was always reality. But at the same time, I have to honor, like, I suffered like a dog, right? But there was just this sense of like, oh, this. So the first thing was like, I don't suffer. It's like I can't, like, it was just gone. And like no sense of how that could even come back. Um, and a lot of things changed, but there was this sense of like something's just that which resisted, which I thought I was this entity that's just gone. And I was just, it was silence. And then I remember trying like, well, it's supposed to be about thoughts, and so what if like, so I would try to see if I could get myself into like a lot of thinking. So, and then I remember it's like I could get my mind into like a really like a lot of mental rage, like not rage and like anger, but in like, oh, and I was like, no, silence is still here. Not there's something gone. It's like whatever the mind was doing had nothing to do with it, because I had these. What happened is like I had these ideas of what it was about, or how it would be, and there was pretty much all of them were so wrong. So
Yeah,
I was
totally.
like, those were going away. It's like, oh, I thought it would be like the mind is calm. It's like, no, the mind could be like get really busy mind, and it's like completely silent at the same time.
Yeah.
And so all of these things, I was like, oh, that. And it's like, why didn't Roberto tell me about? Why didn't he talk about? Why didn't he say it? And then I would go to the recording. It's like, oh, he's saying it all the time. I just did,
Didn't
I just didn't
it's
hear it.
yeah,
I
you
had ideas of what he was saying, and yeah, it was just so that was just so gigantic. Like the change and like everything was suddenly it's suddenly like I could see through thought, like no problem. It was just really boggling, like what a shift. And because it was so subtle that last I think because it wasn't so much subtle, it was just gradual. It was like a few weeks or a couple of months. And it was like, what is this?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I felt this too, this strong sense in the beginning, like this is so different from what they speak about. I was like,
yeah.
this doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. Like, and then now, like at the moment, I do these book clubs and I study Nisargadatta Maharaj. Now I
Mhm.
realize, like, reading it again,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
many years
Yeah,
later, that it is being spoken about all the time and it is there,
exactly.
but it's
Yeah.
just your mind has so many imaginations, and that's the part of the problem, like holding on to the thoughts and the ideas and believing that to be more real than actual experience.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So, and then, something just around then, actually, you were saying things to me even before I like that silence had already set in, but I hadn't really made much of it. And we were talking, you would say like, well, do you feel like maybe sharing, you know, having a YouTube thing and putting stuff online? I was like, me? There's a lot of like hesitation and resistance to that. And like, no, he's like, well, you were just saying things that to me was like, Lisa's saying this to me. That doesn't kind of clock. But then I started to get that a lot. Uh, Richard Moss was like, it's like, yeah, okay, now what? He was just basically kind of saying, yes, okay, it's happening now. What are you going to do? Um, and so there's and a lot of people asking about meditation and this and that, and so I there was a lot of significant people kind of either asking or mentioning or some kind of request around me doing some form of teaching, and I was very hesitant for quite a while. I think like for a whole year I was like, um and then I just felt like, no, now I'm kind of like I'm really kind of holding something back. I just was feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about this, but I don't want to hold back. Um, and that's when I started. I just opened like a Zoom group, um, and things very slowly. I'm very busy. I've had like the most busy 2 years of my professional life, which is going really well. But yeah, it's just lovely to talk about this and share.
yeah,
And it's yeah.
yeah, it is. Yeah, and I always felt like you also your personality, your habits, or your conditions are really good at bringing people together, and you're really good, I think, at speaking to people from all different places in their
Mm,
experience. Like, yeah, just think that you you're good at facilitating the like more community
mm,
aspect of it as well, and
thank you.
yeah, holding people together. But you just have a natural talent for that, as I felt.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So now you teach, and so you do stuff in person or just online.
I
You did a
do.
retreat.
We did, yeah. We did a retreat last February. We're doing one next February. So the first one. that's also something that just surprised me, because I've been so many years in the place of kind of a participant and experiencing what is experienced from that side. And um, I always kind of respected so highly all these teachers, including you, and I still do. But I mean, this, what happened is I didn't expect to have like an effect on others that the effect that I've had going to your retreat or my teacher's retreat. And so there's a bit of like a skepticism, um that it would be that real. Not that it's not real, but my, what happened is like a lot happened at the retreat, and I was like, oh shit, like this is gotta be gentle here, it's powerful.
Yeah.
um and so that was a bit of like, okay, I have to like really be, and this is a lot of what I've been learning as well. Like I say something to somebody and it could really impact them. And even people who don't know, who aren't like in a sense of seeing me as a teacher, just like a family member, and having like a really deep impact.
Yeah.
um and so there's just this sense of like attention and care, like it's no joke.
Yeah. Yeah. And the energy, just energetically, it has an impact. Like, so even
Yeah.
if you're just standing next to someone, and for me, I don't know how it is for you, but it didn't come with a manual.
Oh, I did get, you didn't get the manual. I got the manual. I'll download. I'll pass it. I'll send it to you by email. No,
Okay.
it's super much not a man. Like,
Yeah.
holy cow. Yeah.
So it did come with a manual, and you're different from all other teachers. Everyone has their
Yeah,
uniqueness.
exactly. Yes,
So
exactly.
it's not like you can then just like phone up another teacher and discuss it.
No.
Yeah, there's similarities. Everyone's got their really unique way of teaching, just like everyone's got their unique way of waking up. And this is why there's so many different teachers, because there's so many different ways to wake up. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, yeah, then this sounds a bit terrible, but then it's a bit of trial and error. Like
Oh,
in
yeah.
the end, it's like it's all God and it's all divine, but it's like yeah, you can't just shove someone off the cliff. Like that's disastrous. You have to
Yeah.
at least put a bouncy castle at the bottom, or so it's like this trial and error, and this is like really where you begin to master it, like in the sense of um, you know, you have to try and do it, and then you really begin to see the
Yeah.
dynamics and the patterns of people that are coming to you, and so how
Yeah.
hard you can push. In the end, it's God, so it's all perfect, but it's like the body is learning, or this system is changing and expanding. And I feel as a teacher, you just keep on expanding and learning, like in you,
Oh, yeah.
and it's like that humility and humbleness as teacher as well, I think needs to take place, that, you know, it's ultimately there's no mistakes, but on the human level, Lisa can make mistakes. It didn't come with a manual. It's, it's,
Yeah.
it's you do, yeah, so there's got to be a gentleness, particularly the energetics, because that is so invisible, you don't know how receptive someone is to the energetic.
That's the thing that surprised me the most. That was the part where I was, because I don't personally, like before I would, if I went to a retreat, or I would feel this huge shift in like energetically, I would kind of get inducted, right? And I don't feel that anymore. And so I don't know if that's happening to somebody around me. I can't tell. And so it's this work of kind of learning, like, well, that might be happening, so be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many different things, like as a woman teacher, just as an example, is, I was quite young when it happened, and being a woman teacher that has like very open lower chakras
Yeah.
can have issues, as you can imagine, like because everybody's responding energetically. So
Mm.
if you're opening their chakras, then instantly the attraction and everything goes onto you. And like
Yeah.
I remember it actually happened with me and Ramesh. I had a lower chakra opening and a heart opening at Ramesh's. But Ramesh was so much older than me. He was like 90,
Hmm.
89 when I first went to see him. And so what happened when it happened was my attention just slightly moved and it went to the person behind him, like someone was behind him. And this like immense like projection and sexual
Oh wow.
energy and
Yeah.
went onto him and like in loveness. But like all these types of things can happen. And then like different chakras have different energies to them. And it's not that, I mean, to me, I'm not, I, I know it's the same for you. It's like in the end, it's like this stillness and coming to the emptiness. But what seems to have to happen for a lot of people is opening of the chakras and the energy and releasing.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
always the case because there's so many different ways to awaken. And in that opening, it's like such a different way of living energetically as opposed to in the mind and in your ideas and in your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel lucky to have spent so much time with Roberto and so close, and so much learning also on like how he taught, and there's just so much. It's hard to and then also knowing you and um having had that, what I'm reflecting on for you, it happened so young. For me, in a way, it's like, well, there's a really good side of that, in like just in a sense, like I've been exposed to a lot, and so
Yeah.
I feel like I have some tools.
Yeah.
um yeah, like Roberto would have us read every month a book, and it would go from like psychology to history to spirituality to just kind of like learn, and then we would work through it from all of the approaches. And so there was this psychological work and the emotional work and the energetic work, and
Mm.
it's just so valuable. I
Yeah.
think that kind of, I highlight that a lot in teaching and in the groups, in that yes, we can go direct to kind of the non-dual um, teaching, but I always say it has to come kind of interweaved with what I would call the growing up. Um, I think you call it the working on the person, but it's like the waking up and the growing up, and they kind of have to go. They're completely different, but they're not separate either.
Mm. Well,
And so
that's really sweet when you call it the growing up. I love that.
yeah,
Growing up. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
all of the emotional work and the trauma work and psychological work, the mind, and um, yeah, I think it's so valuable. And in the end, it feels like to me the waking up is almost like what makes it possible to do the growing up more smoothly, in a sense. Like even if the waking up is gradual, in the sense of there's partial seeing through, and then there's total seeing through, but then there's integrating, um, and that as that's happening, you're able to kind of go to deeper places with, for example, trauma. Like I wasn't able to be with a lot of difficult fears and pains until the waking up happened fully. But I was able to meet it to a degree when the waking up was partial. I was able to be more with it. And so I find like that approach of there's a bit of a back and forth between the two. That's how it was for me. And so maybe that's how I work with it. But um, I think it's this valuable kind of mix of the two. But ultimately, it's like right now, everything to me is just life, and it's really all about like living and growing, not necessarily in the sense of getting somewhere in the future, but in in the creativity aspect of it, of like creating the most beautiful, loving. I say co-creating because it's just the dance, right, of this mystery. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm loving listening to you. I listen to some of your videos on YouTube. They come popping up
Oh,
with Catherine. I'm
nice.
always so excited when I see you both together.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really touches your heart. Like when you've seen someone for so many years, you know, dedicated and committed, and then going through all this process, and then this shift to happen. It's like, yeah, it's
Yeah,
like such a celebration.
you've heard me many hours complaining about stuff. You sat through a lot.
But
Thank you.
there was also lots of open-heartedness. Like I always
Yeah.
really admired your just commitment, and it maybe didn't feel
Mm,
like commitment to you. It felt like no other way. But you just
hmm
kept presenting yourself. You kept coming back to the table. I don't know. It was you didn't leave.
hmm hmm Yeah, yeah. It was very clear to me at one point there was no other way. And so, yeah, that was just really, but yeah, you can call it commitment, but it was more the second. It's just everything else I knew wasn't gonna work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, your head is in the tiger's mouth.
yeah, yeah,
Oh, it's really beautiful. Yeah,
yeah.
so I'll put links to everything in the box
Oh,
below
yeah.
so people can
Thank you.
find you. And I'm so glad we did this. Last year I wasn't quite
Yeah.
ready. I had my stuff. So finally we did this and it felt more
Well, it's
organic this time. And
yeah.
really
I love it's
really joyful from my side. Like
it's a big
yeah,
pleasure for me, and thank you so much to reaching out and doing this.
yeah,
Yeah.
nice. Okay, stop.